In the city of Guadalajara, one of Mexico's busiest urban centers, life can change in the blink of an eye. The protagonist of our story is a simple man, without many possessions, known on the streets for his irreverent behavior and for always getting into trouble. His name is Javier, but everyone calls him El Vagabundo, the vagabond. He lives on the fringes of society, wandering the streets with the feeling that nothing really matters. The antagonist, on the other hand, is a member of one of the country's most feared organizations, the Jalisco Cartel. Juan Carlos, known within the cartel as El Diablo, has a ruthless reputation. He is a man of few words and violent gestures, and his loyalty to the cartel is absolute. His mere presence is enough to instill deep fear, but his brutality earns him respect, and everyone knows he has no mercy for the weak. On an ordinary day, Javier sits on a park bench as usual, oblivious to the dangers surrounding him. However, what he doesn't know is that his life is about to take an unexpected turn. Fate puts him in the path of Juan Carlos and his men, who are on a mission of intimidation. They see him as just another easy target for amusement, without realizing that by insulting him, the response he will give will be something they never imagined. This meeting will be the first in a series of events that will shake the balance of power within the cartel, leaving everyone involved in a state of complete surprise. Mexico, with its vibrant culture and contrast between beauty and violence, serves as the backdrop for our story. In Guadalajara, bustling streets alternate with dark alleys where illegal trade thrives. The welcome sign is easily replaced by the sound of sirens and gunfire at night. The place is dominated by fear, but also by the silent resistance of ordinary people who try to survive while watching the war unfold around them. Javier, the vagabond, has a story that few know. He is not just a homeless man, but a former soldier who, after the loss of his family in a brutal drug-related attack, became lost in the emptiness of life. The pain led him to live on the streets, where the daily struggle for survival and addiction became his reality. Although he looks like a broken man, inside there is still a flame of resistance. It is not only alcohol and indifference that dominate him, but also an old desire for revenge against those who destroyed his life. The contrast between Javier and Juan Carlos is evident in everything. Where Javier is a broken soul trying to hide from the world, Juan Carlos is a man who embodies absolute power. His rise in the Jalisco Cartel was no accident. He was shaped by brutality, and his soul became immune to the pain of others. He is a man with a plan and a vision, but also a man who begins to lose himself in his own power. The arrogance that comes with his status as a leader prevents him from realizing that there is something on the streets of Guadalajara that he has not yet understood. People are not just victims. Sometimes they have something to offer that no one expects. Juan Carlos is on a mission to quell a possible betrayal within his own cartel. Rumors are circulating that a high-ranking member is about to turn himself into the police. His job is to eliminate any threat, and he doesn't hesitate to use his force to intimidate anyone who gets in his way. When he encounters Javier, he sees only another destitute man not worth wasting time on. But he doesn't know that, at that moment, he is about to trigger something that will change the dynamics of his empire. One afternoon, as Javier wanders the streets, he hears rumors about the Jalisco Cartel and its escalating violence. He's never had the courage to confront the bosses head-on, but something inside him begins to change. He will no longer be just a victim, and perhaps this time he can do something to change his own fate, or at least try. The grim atmosphere of Guadalajara, combined with the tensions of the cartel war, creates an oppressive and uncertain environment. The streets are saturated with drug trafficking, and every corner holds a story of betrayal, revenge, or loss. The city, with its ups and downs, becomes a character in itself, shaping the destinies of those who live there, whether they take risks or try to hide. Tensions between Javier and the Jalisco Cartel quickly escalate. When Juan Carlos and his men approach Javier, they don't expect resistance. The cartel members are used to intimidating, humiliating, and even destroying anyone who gets in their way, but something about him is about to change that. Javier, in a moment of pure adrenaline and pent-up rage, responds to the insult in an unexpected way. He is no longer the broken man hiding in the streets. He looks Juan Carlos in the eye, fearless, and says something the cartel's henchmen aren't prepared to hear. "You think you can humiliate me, but there's something you still don't understand. I've already lost everything, and I have nothing left to lose." These words, spoken with ruthless sincerity, cause the cartel leader and his men to hesitate for a moment, and that moment of hesitation will be what saves Javier's life. What begins as a simple exchange of words quickly transforms into something more. Juan Carlos, though in control of the situation, feels a pang of doubt. He has dealt with many, but something about that dirty, tired man seems challenging. The atmosphere around them grows heavier, as if the air were charged with an electric energy. Javier is not just another homeless man. He has something inside him, something Juan Carlos can't immediately identify, but which begins to deeply trouble him. Instead of ordering Javier's execution, as he would with anyone else, Juan Carlos orders his men to stand aside. He decides to test the vagabond, offering him a choice. "You have two paths, my friend. Either you join us, or you stay out there and die like anyone else." It's an offer many would accept out of fear, but Javier, with an ironic smile, refuses. He knows this is his chance to turn the tables. He may not have an army or the physical strength of a cartel, but something is awakening within him, something that will make him fight like never before. Javier's refusal does not go unnoticed. At that moment, a mixture of respect and disdain grows in Juan Carlos. He realizes he cannot simply kill this man because there is something in his attitude that disconcerts him. Javier has a strength he never imagined seeing in someone so insignificant. The situation becomes more complicated, and for the first time, the cartel begins to realize that the streets of Guadalajara are not as dominated as they thought. Meanwhile, Javier is forced to confront the reality of his choice. Refusing Juan Carlos's offer means he's entering dangerous territory, but at the same time, he knows that if he succumbs to the cartel's violence, he'll only be perpetuating the cycle of suffering that led him there. He no longer wants to be a victim, no matter the cost. He wants retribution, and now he's more determined than ever. Juan Carlos's henchmen begin to observe Javier with a mixture of curiosity and caution. There's something unpredictable about him, something that, though still unformed, begins to show signs that he could be a real threat. As tensions rise, the game between them begins to shift, and the streets of Guadalajara, with their chaos and violence, become the stage for an unexpected confrontation. The tension in the air is palpable, and while Juan Carlos begins to realize that this battle will not be like the others, Javier begins to plot his own revenge. He may not have the same resources, but his resilience and intelligence begin to work in his favor. The war he started may be silent, but it will be intense and, in the end, surprising to everyone. As the confrontation between Javier and the Jalisco cartel intensifies, other forces begin to operate behind the scenes. The city of Guadalajara, with its dirty streets illuminated by flickering lights, is more than just a backdrop for the conflicts. It also hides secrets, alliances, and betrayals that go beyond what the cartel and Javier imagine. One of the subplots that begins to develop is the relationship between Javier and Maria, a young student who lives in a peripheral neighborhood of the city. Maria is the daughter of a local merchant who, for years, has felt threatened by the growing presence of the cartel in the region. Javier meets her by chance on a rainy afternoon when she tries to help one of her neighbors who was brutally attacked by members of the cartel. Maria is driven by the hope that one day something will change, and that drug trafficking and violence will stop dominating the city. The encounter between the two is simple, yet significant. Javier sees in her a spark of resistance that in many ways reflects what he himself was in the past. She, in turn, sees in Javier an opportunity for revenge against those who destroyed her community. The connection between the two is instantaneous, but at the same time, complex. Javier, being a man marked by loss and despair, struggles to open himself up to someone again. Maria, on the other hand, has an unwavering faith in the idea of justice, something that makes her a powerful ally, but also vulnerable. Meanwhile, on the cartel side, a betrayal begins to unfold. Alejandro, one of Juan Carlos's trusted men, is starting to question the orders he receives. He is no longer the ambitious young man who joined the cartel with the dream of reaching the top. Now he finds himself trapped in a spiral of violence and remorse, especially after an incident where he was forced to eliminate an informant who was, in fact, a childhood friend. The weight of guilt begins to erode his loyalty to the cartel, and he starts searching for a way out of this life. Alejandro, however, is aware that escape will not be easy. The cartel does not forgive desertions. If he tries to escape, he will be killed without mercy. But his situation changes when he witnesses a moment that challenges his worldview. He sees Javier confronting Juan Carlos. For the first time, he begins to question the true nature of his loyalty, and a possible betrayal begins to take shape. Over time, Javier and Alejandro's paths intertwine in an unexpected way. Javier, in his quest for revenge, begins to realize that to defeat the cartel, he will need allies within his own ranks. Alejandro, in turn, begins to see in Javier a possibility of redemption, an opportunity to repair the damage he has caused over the years. As tensions rise, the subplots begin to intertwine. Javier's quest for justice becomes more than personal revenge. It transforms into a fight for the soul of the city, for the future of people like Maria and others who still try to resist the cartel's absolute power. Alejandro, now torn between loyalty to the cartel and his conscience, begins to see himself as a crucial piece in this silent struggle. He knows that if he wants a chance at redemption, he will need to collaborate with Javier. What seemed to be a simple story of one man's revenge against an empire of violence begins to expand. Javier's fight for justice is no longer just about him, but about everyone who suffers at the hands of the cartel, and more importantly, about those who have the power to change the fate of Guadalajara. The growing tension between Javier and the Jalisco Cartel reaches its peak on a dark night, filled with suspense and fear. Javier, now more involved than ever, manages to reach Alejandro, the cartel man who is slowly beginning to distance himself from his loyalty to Juan Carlos. They meet in secret, in a secluded location outside the city, where the risk of being seen is minimal. Alejandro, burdened by a guilty conscience, begins to reveal crucial secrets about the cartel's operations to Javier. He tells him about an imminent negotiation between Juan Carlos and a rival cartel, where a large sum of money will be exchanged for a portion of Guadalajara's territory. This information is vital because if Javier manages to intercept the negotiation, he will not only have the chance to weaken the cartel, but also to expose the corruption within the organization. However, what Javier doesn't know is that, while seeking out Alejandro for this information, he is being monitored. Juan Carlos, suspicious of the changes in his men's behavior, begins to be more vigilant, and without them realizing it, their every move is being followed. When Javier and Alejandro meet, they are interrupted by an ambush. The cartel now knows something is wrong, and they won't let Javier escape. What seemed to be a secret operation by two men against a violent empire turns into a deadly trap. Alejandro's revelation about the deal that was about to take place is no longer just an opportunity to weaken the cartel, but the key to his own survival. What Javier discovered is more than he imagined. The situation is more complex than a simple revenge confrontation. Now, he must decide whether to trust Alejandro and use the information to bring down the cartel, or to do it alone, risking his life and the lives of everyone around him. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Guadalajara is changing. The population, which has been living under the terror of the cartel, begins to realize that something is happening. Javier becomes a figure of resistance, and his story begins to spread through the streets. Even those who previously saw him as a simple vagabond now begin to understand that he is the only one capable of confronting the oppressive power of the cartel. Maria, his ally, receives information about the ambush and prepares to help in some way, but she also knows that getting involved could mean her death. The turning point occurs when Javier, surrounded and with no way out, is confronted by Juan Carlos and his henchmen in an abandoned warehouse, where he was taken as bait. However, the twist isn't just the physical confrontation. When Juan Carlos tries to humiliate Javier again, he doesn't react with the usual fear of his other enemies. Instead, he stands up, breaks free from the cartel's oppression, and confronts Juan Carlos in a way no other man would dare. He speaks words that change everything. "I'm no longer a vagrant, I am the resistance, and I will show everyone that true strength comes from within." The turning point comes when, attempting to confront Javier, Juan Carlos is surprised by a betrayal within his own circle. Alejandro, in an act of unexpected courage, sabotages the cartel's plan, freeing Javier from the trap. He chooses to no longer serve the cartel, and his actions help Javier escape. But in doing so, Alejandro also knows that his life is doomed. As Juan Carlos tries to regain control of the situation, he realizes that Javier is no longer just a desperate man. He is now a symbol of resistance, something he never anticipated. Javier's fight will no longer be about personal revenge, but about defeating an empire that has long believed it can control everyone. The game has changed, and with it, the balance of power in the city begins to shift irreversibly. Alejandro's sabotage and Javier's escape irreversibly transform the situation in Guadalajara. Javier's struggle, once personal, now takes on much larger proportions, and the city begins to see his name associated with the resistance against the cartel. The tension, previously confined to the shadows, now explodes in the streets and alleys of the city. After the confrontation, Juan Carlos's first reaction is fury. He cannot accept Alejandro's betrayal, nor the loss of control over the situation. His empire, which had always been an unbeatable fortress, begins to crack. The Jalisco Cartel, always feared, now sees its own people rebelling. Juan Carlos's men begin to question his leadership, and the fissures in the cartel widen. The streets, once dominated by fear, now begin to be filled with murmurs of hope and resistance. Even the cartel members, initially skeptical, begin to realize that perhaps they are not fighting for an unbeatable leader, but rather for a decaying empire. For Javier, the consequences of his actions are even more profound. He, who previously lived aimlessly, without hope and without purpose, now finds his life at a crossroads. He becomes not only a figure of resistance, but also a symbol that the impossible can be achieved. His relationship with Maria strengthens, and she, once a reluctant ally, now becomes an important force in the fight against the cartel. Together, they begin to devise a bolder plan, an operation to expose the cartel and end its domination once and for all. However, reactions to this new reality are not unanimous. Alejandro, although he betrayed the cartel, is aware that his life is in danger. He knows that by helping Javier, he is putting himself in a vulnerable position. Even after sabotaging Juan Carlos's plans, he cannot escape the consequences of his choices. When he meets with Javier and Maria to discuss the next steps, he reveals a painful truth. His betrayal of the cartel did not save him from death. Now he is as marked as anyone who has crossed Juan Carlos's path. But instead of regretting it, Alejandro feels a strange sense of relief. He finally did the right thing. Meanwhile, Juan Carlos's henchmen spread throughout the city, hunting Javier and anyone who has been involved with him. The fear that once hung over Guadalajara now spreads even further, but at the same time, a new kind of resistance begins to grow in the shadows. Small groups begin to form, united by the idea that if Javier can challenge the cartel's power, perhaps they all can. Amidst all this, the emotional impact on Javier begins to intensify. He knows there's no turning back. What began as an act of revenge is now a war for the freedom and dignity of the city. Every step he takes is now a declaration of war against Juan Carlos's empire. He feels the weight of this struggle, but also the strength that comes from finally finding a purpose. However, with each step, he finds himself further from his own humanity. He wonders how far his journey will take him and what he will need to sacrifice to achieve victory. The city, once divided and silenced by fear, begins to stir. The population, though fearful, begins to support Javier's cause. They cannot fight the cartel directly, but they can unite in small actions, such as providing information or sheltering those who are fleeing. Javier is no longer alone in his fight. He becomes an unexpected leader, someone who awakens the spirit of resistance in ordinary people. At the same time, Juan Carlos can no longer ignore the fact that his leadership is being publicly and audaciously challenged. He calls a meeting with his closest men, where the tension is palpable. Alejandro's presence, now isolated from everyone, no longer makes a difference. Juan Carlos knows the end is coming, but he is unwilling to succumb without one last attempt to crush Javier's rebellion once and for all. With mounting pressure from the cartel and growing support from the people of Guadalajara, Javier finds himself in an uncomfortable position. He is no longer the broken man who wandered the streets. Now he is the leader of a movement against an empire of terror. However, this new responsibility brings with it an emotional burden he was not prepared to bear. With every decision he makes, he feels the weight of the lives that depend on him. Javier begins to realize that to be truly effective in his fight against the cartel, he needs to evolve. His journey of revenge, initially driven by pain and anger, begins to transform into a fight for justice and the freedom of his city. He is no longer driven by the pain of the past, but by the vision of a future where the streets of Guadalajara can breathe without the constant fear of drug trafficking. To that end, Javier begins to look for ways to improve his leadership. He allies himself with people who were previously enemies, like Alejandro, and begins to work together with local leaders who were equally tired of the violence. Javier learns to negotiate, to inspire trust, and, most importantly, to plan more precisely. He can no longer act impulsively. His decisions now impact the lives of many people. But Javier's growth isn't just strategic. He also begins to reconnect with his human side, the man he had lost so long ago. His relationship with Maria deepens, and he begins to realize that perhaps he has something to lose again. She is not just an ally, but someone who challenges him to see the world in a different way. Maria, with her optimism and inner strength, inspires him to keep going, even when he feels his strength is reaching its limit. At the same time, Alejandro faces his own process of transformation. As a former cartel member, he carries a heavy burden of guilt and remorse. Every action he takes to help Javier and the resistance is a step towards redemption. But he also knows that at some point he will have to face the weight of his choices. His journey is more difficult because he doesn't have the same certainties as Javier. For him, it's not just about fighting the cartel, but about rebuilding his own morality, about finding meaning in his life after so many years of violence and betrayal. However, the battle ahead will demand more than intelligence and morality. When Juan Carlos, in a last-ditch effort to regain control, sends an army of henchmen to eliminate Javier and anyone who opposes him, the resistance led by Javier must unite as never before. They begin to execute a daring plan to infiltrate the cartel's base of operations and expose its criminal activities to the world. To do this, they need vital information about the cartel's structure, which can only be obtained by infiltrating its most heavily guarded areas. Javier, Maria, and Alejandro lead the mission, which is full of obstacles, tensions, and violent confrontations. Every step they take is risky, but also a reflection of Javier's transformation. He is no longer the man who hides in the darkness, but the man who now chooses to act with courage and determination. He teaches others that to win, it is not enough to simply resist. It is necessary to act with purpose, strategy, and unity. During the mission, Javier faces a harsh reality. To defeat the cartel, he will have to sacrifice even more than his freedom. At the height of the confrontation, he has the chance to finally face Juan Carlos. But instead of seeking personal revenge, Javier chooses to do something more radical. He seeks to destroy the empire of violence that Juan Carlos built, not just him personally. His fight is no longer about him, but about a free future for those who are still enslaved by fear and violence. This moment of clarity marks Javier's true transformation. He realizes that to win, he doesn't need to become what he hates most. He can be a leader without sacrificing his humanity. He is capable of being strong, but also compassionate, determined, but also just. He overcomes his pain, his fears, and becomes the man Guadalajara needs, someone who, unlike Juan Carlos, chooses freedom and justice over power. After weeks of planning and strategic attacks, the resistance led by Javier is now at its strongest. The Jalisco Cartel, with its vast network of violence and corruption, is beginning to feel the effects of this unexpected struggle. Javier, Maria, and Alejandro have managed to gather support not only from the local population, but also from some disillusioned members of the cartel itself, who, seeing the strength of their movement, have begun to desert. With each passing day, Juan Carlos's control over Guadalajara weakens. The merchants who once bowed to the cartel begin to act more freely, and the streets, once dominated by violence and fear, begin to experience a sense of freedom. But this freedom comes at a price, and Javier knows it. The final confrontation with the cartel is near, and he can no longer hide from reality. To win, he will have to make a sacrifice. The resistance prepares for its final offensive. They know that if they fail to seize control of the cartel's main base, a heavily fortified complex in the mountains surrounding the city, the fight will be in vain. Juan Carlos, though weakened, is still a formidable enemy, and his thirst for power has led him to commit boundless atrocities. Throughout the weeks of preparation, Javier trained his allies, reinforced the importance of acting in a coordinated and controlled manner, and began to behave like a leader, more confident in his actions, but also aware of the gravity of what was to come. In the days leading up to the final battle, a palpable tension grips the members of the resistance. Maria, who has always been Javier's anchor, feels a growing anguish. She can no longer ignore the fact that her relationship with him will change forever. She fears for the future, for Javier's life and her own. She knows this mission may be their last chance to truly win, but she also understands that the price of victory may be too high. Alejandro, once just a man seeking redemption, now finds himself in a dilemma. His loyalty to Javier and the cause is unquestionable, but he carries within him the weight of the choices he has made over the years. He knows that by destroying the cartel, he is also destroying the very world he knew and in which he became lost. He can no longer be a simple soldier. Now he is a man with a greater purpose, but also with an inescapable personal sacrifice. As resistance members prepare to storm the cartel's base, Javier receives one last message from his old friend, who now works within Juan Carlos's organization. The friend, still fearful, reveals to Javier the biggest secret of all. The real reason Juan Carlos wields so much power is not just violence, but a dark pact involving powerful figures in the government and local police. If the resistance manages to expose this pact, Juan Carlos's empire will crumble even faster. However, this will require Javier to go beyond what he had planned and enter extremely dangerous territory. Now, Javier and his allies know that ultimate victory will depend not only on capturing the cartel's base, but also on publicly exposing this pact. They need to act decisively and quickly. The operation becomes more than a simple battle for survival. It transforms into a war for freedom and truth. To achieve this, Javier can no longer be the lone man hiding in the shadows. He will need to unite all the forces he can, seize every opportunity, and trust his allies more than ever before. The tension grows unbearable as the resistance advances toward the site of the confrontation. Each step is taken with the weight of imminent sacrifice. Every man and woman who follows Javier now understands that their life, their freedom, and the future of Guadalajara are in their hands. There is no turning back. Everyone's fate is about to be sealed. The city, now divided between those who support the resistance and those who remain loyal to the cartel, waits in silence. It is known that what is to come will forever change the course of Guadalajara's history. Dawn arrives as a harbinger of change. The heavy air of Guadalajara seems to breathe in unison with the hearts of the resistance members. Javier, Maria, and Alejandro are ready to face the last obstacle between them and the freedom they all yearn for. The meticulously planned scheme involves invading the cartel's main compound, where Juan Carlos and his henchmen take refuge. However, the real challenge will be dismantling the power network that sustains the criminal empire, including the shadowy pact with local authorities that keeps the cartel running. When the first shot is heard, the silence preceding battle is broken, and the tension hanging over the city explodes into action. Javier, leading the resistance, places himself on the front line. He is no longer the broken man seeking revenge. He has become a leader, someone who now fights not only for himself, but for all those who have been oppressed. The courage and determination that were once just a spark now transform into a wildfire that consumes everything in its path. Alejandro, alongside Javier, plays a crucial role. As a former cartel member, he knows the enemy base's weaknesses. His contribution is not only strategic, but also emotional. He knows that by helping Javier, he is redeeming his life, erasing the shadows of his past. When the two meet again at the heart of the confrontation, Alejandro makes a risky decision. Instead of following Javier's every move, he infiltrates the complex via a different route, aiming to reach a key point where the pact with the authorities is stored. Maria, watching Javier's movements, feels a mixture of adrenaline and dread. She knows the man she loves is now in imminent danger, but she also knows there's no more time to hesitate. The operation must succeed to ensure everyone's survival. She takes on the responsibility of coordinating communication between the resistance members and, with surprising calm, begins to give orders, while the battle around her grows ever more intense. Inside the cartel compound, Juan Carlos, who once saw himself as invincible, begins to realize that the resistance has more power than he imagined. When he comes face to face with Javier, the atmosphere changes drastically. Javier, covered in dust and blood but with unwavering determination, faces Juan Carlos, who seems for a moment completely out of control. The man who used to control everything with his brutality is now the vulnerable one, while Javier becomes the personification of the resistance. "Do you think you can change this, Javier?" Juan Carlos shouts, his voice thick with anger and contempt. "I am what holds this city together. Without me, you all fall. You don't understand, do you?" Javier, without hesitation, replies with a calmness that defies the chaos around him. I understand more than you think. You created an empire of fear, but that empire will crumble, not by force, but by the truth. What follows is an intense struggle, not only physical but also psychological. Juan Carlos, armed and in control of the complex, tries to crush Javier with his strength and violence. But Javier, though wounded, stands firm. Each blow he receives only makes him more determined. He is no longer a man seeking revenge. He is the hope of an entire city, and the energy he feels around him, the strength of the resistance, the support of Maria and Alejandro, drives him to continue. As the confrontation unfolds, Alejandro arrives at the point where the secret pact is kept. He faces the ultimate dilemma: expose the pact now, or continue the fight against Juan Carlos's henchmen. He chooses the first option. With a swift gesture, he destroys the documents, revealing to the world the corruption that sustained the cartel. This creates a crucial distraction, and the resistance gains the decisive advantage. In the final moment, when Javier has the chance to defeat Juan Carlos, he does something unexpected. Instead of killing him, he publicly exposes him for all to see. The fight is no longer about the death of a man, but about destroying the empire he created. The revelation of the secret pact and the public exposure of the cartel caused the government and police forces, who were committed to Juan Carlos, to turn against him. His empire crumbles, and the city of Guadalajara sees, for the first time in a long time, the possibility of a future free from the violence of drug trafficking. Javier, Maria, and Alejandro, though victorious, know that the fight is never simple. But at that moment, the city feels the relief of knowing that what seemed impossible is now a reality. The Jalisco Cartel has been defeated. After the fall of the Jalisco Cartel, Guadalajara begins to breathe again for the first time in years. The city, once marked by violence and fear, now sees an uncertain future, but one full of possibilities. The resistance, led by Javier, Maria, and Alejandro, achieved the impossible, bringing down an empire of blood and corruption. The victory, though sweet, did not come without sacrifices. The journey of Javier and all those who supported him was marked by immense losses and challenges. However, the city now has a chance to start over, and hope is palpable in the streets. Javier, though victorious, feels the weight of everything that has happened. He is no longer the man who sought revenge, but rather the leader who fought for a greater cause. Looking at the city, he knows the fight doesn't end here. Victory over the cartel is only the beginning of a long road to reconstruction. The Jalisco Cartel may have been defeated, but the corruption and violence it left behind still need to be eradicated. Javier knows that he and his allies will have to continue fighting, no longer against a visible enemy, but against the corrupt system that allowed this empire to exist for so long. Javier's relationship with Maria grows even stronger. They, who began as allies in a battle for survival, now share a life marked by struggle and overcoming adversity. Javier, though scarred by the horrors he has faced, finds in Maria a reason to keep going. She, in turn, has always believed in Javier's potential and sees in him not only a leader, but a man who has finally found his purpose. Together, they know their journey is not over. There is much more to be done, but now, at least, they can look to the future with renewed hope. Alejandro, for his part, finds the redemption he so desperately sought. By helping to bring down the cartel's empire, he finally atones for the mistakes of the past. He knows that, although he saved the city, he cannot erase what he did in the past. But now he can move forward with a new purpose. He joins the resistance to ensure that what has been gained is not lost. His sacrifice was not in vain. He has become a fundamental part of the change that is now beginning to happen in Guadalajara. As the sun sets over the city, Javier, Maria, and Alejandro watch from a high point, reflecting on the path they have traveled. They know that the battle for freedom does not end with the fall of the cartel, but they also know that their courage and resistance have opened a new era. The city, though still weakened by the damage of the past, now has a clearer future, a future where oppression will no longer have a place. What once seemed impossible, overcoming fear, corruption, and violence, is now a reality. Guadalajara is free. But as everyone knows, freedom is a precious commodity that must be defended at every step. And however many challenges the city still faces, the legacy of Javier and all those who fought alongside him will be remembered as the beginning of a new era for everyone. Years have passed since the fall of the Jalisco Cartel. Guadalajara has transformed into a place where, finally, freedom and hope flourish. Javier and Maria now lead a new era of reconstruction, with the city experiencing a peace that once seemed impossible. Alejandro, who helped cement the end of Juan Carlos's empire, works tirelessly to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. However, in the shadows, Juan Carlos's former allies are still watching. The Battle of Guadalajara may have been won, but the war for true freedom, for a city without corruption, is far from over. The journey of Javier, Maria, and Alejandro shows us that even in the face of the most brutal adversity, it is possible to fight for a better future. Guadalajara, now free, is a testament to courage, sacrifice, and hope. But, as we have seen, the struggle is never truly won. There are always challenges to be faced. You, the reader, can also make a difference, whether in your community, in the fight for justice, or in your own life. Ask yourself, what are your limits, and how far would you go to make a difference? Share this story, inspire others, and continue the fight for a more just world.